The proposed legislation that was intended to remove the federal carbon price from propane and natural gas used on farms for things such as grain drying and barn heating is facing a critical juncture in the Senate in Ottawa. And joining us here on Real Agriculture now to discuss and bring us up to speed, we are pleased to welcome back Dave Carey, co-chair of the Agricultural Carbon Alliance. Dave is also vice president of government and industry relations with the Canadian Canola Growers Association. Thanks for taking the time to join us and bring us this update today, Dave.
Yeah, thanks, Kelvin, for having me, and thanks for Real Ag for keeping the spotlight on this topic and this important bill.
Bring us up to speed. Where are we at now with C-234? It's still before the Senate Agriculture and Forestry Committee?
Yeah, the Senate Agriculture and Forestry Committee began clause by clause in the bill, which is the last stage of committee proceedings last Thursday. They weren't able to get through them all, so it will be going clause by clause this evening, and likely they will finish. We anticipated there would be amendments submitted to the bill as sort of a common practice. So there was a number of amendments proposed. The two, I guess, main ones would be an amendment around removing the exemption for heating and cooling of livestock barns, greenhouses, and other growing structures, as well as an amendment to change the sunset clause from 8 years to 3 years. Actually, when the committee began its proceedings, so the Senate's job is not to change the sort of will of the House of Commons. It's to scrutinize, it's to make sure that no stone's been left unturned. But the Senate traditionally does not have a few powers. One, to be spending powers. They don't pass their own budgetary bills. And two, by common practice, they don't typically change the spirit or intent of legislation, particularly a private member's bill. So at the beginning of last Thursday, the chair of the Senate Ag Committee, Ontario Senator Robert Black, actually ruled the amendments out of order because they go against the spirit and intent of what the House of Commons duly passed to them. Unfortunately, through some very strange things at break convention, you had a government representative, the deputy leader of the government in the Senate, join the committee only for clause by clause, and his ruling was put to a vote and was overruled. In that case, there was also a strange abstention from the deputy chair, Senator Simons, which we were again perplexed by. When it got to the heating and cooling of livestock barns, we anticipated it to be, just by looking at the meetings we'd had, we anticipated it to be an even split vote, 6-6, with the tie going to the chair. Again, and Senator Rob Black, we anticipated, would have ruled against it, as he'd already ruled the amendments out of order. Again, very surprisingly, Alberta Senator Paula Simons voted in favor of removing the livestock heating and cooling provisions, which impact greenhouses, livestock, dairy, poultry, as well as mushrooms and others. So we were not anticipating that. That was a wild card, and her vote unfortunately tipped the scale so that the amendment was passed. The amendment around the sunset clause was defeated. But again, we're now at a point where when a private member's bill has been amended, if it does pass the next stage in the Senate, it would be referred back to the House of Commons. The concern there is that it changes the spirit of the bill, but it's all is not lost, I would say, Kelvin. It's important to note that a committee stage is a report. So basically the committee is kind of track changes the word document is a good way of putting it. And it'll be up to the Senate, that report stage, so when they vote on it again, to decide, do we want to accept those track changes or reject them? And we will be calling for the Senate to reject the proposed changes. And if that happens, then the Senator Wells, the bill sponsor, would be able to reintroduce the bill at third reading in its original form. So all is not lost, but the Senate as a whole is going to have to decide whether they want to uphold what they've heard from farm groups and the House of Commons, or whether or not they want to take these two revisions and amendments that I would argue are out of scope and out of order for the Senate to do.
How common is it for the Senate when a report gets to when a bill gets to report stage, for the Senate as a whole to reject or decline the amendments put forward by a committee?
Yeah, I'd say we would be on the rarer side for sure. I would say that the way this bill has been treated is not the norm, though. Typically, a private member's bill usually sort of flies under the radar. It's not government legislation. It doesn't have attached spending. I think Larry Maguire's private member's bill around intergenerational land transfer for farms, fisheries, and small businesses did not even receive the same level of sort of scrutiny that Bill C-234 is receiving, again, which is shocking. I think senators for the most part, feel that they should defer to the committee because those are the committee experts that have, reviewed this bill, heard witnesses that deal with the subject matter on a regular basis. However, again, which is not the norm, once Bill C-234 passed second reading, was referred to the Senate Agriculture Committee. We saw a fundamental change in the members. All of a sudden, our critic, Senator Dalfond, the bill's critic, is a member of the Senate Agriculture Committee. The second most vocal proponent, Senator Wu, found himself on that committee. And then again, very concerning that for clause by clause, the deputy leader of the Progressive Senators, which is the government's representatives in the Senate, joined only for clause by clause. So listen to none of the deliberations, none of the witnesses, only joined for the procedural part, which is, again, very rare that you would actually have the government directly interfere with a private member's bill. We've spoken to many senators throughout this process, and we'll continue to do so, both as ACA and as our 15 National Farm Group members. But it certainly is concerning to see this level of interference with the private member's bill that was duly passed by the House of Commons, by all Conservatives, all Bloc, all NDP, all Green, and 3 Liberals. And I think if this vote was to happen again in the House of Commons, you'd likely have more Liberals voting in favor of it this time, given we've seen a number of Liberals break rank around inflation, cost of living, and the carbon tax simply is making life unaffordable for Canadians.
Yeah, originally when we heard that it might go back to the House with this amendment, my thought was, well, I guess it's just going to take longer, but there are the vast majority of MPs from, like you said, all parties that support this bill, so it's just going to go through again. But because it is a private member's bill, that's where it could be in trouble if it goes back to the House. That's why you're putting so much focus now on having these amendments rejected at the report stage, that it actually clears through the Senate at this point.
Exactly. We don't want to get in a ping pong match between the House of Commons and Senate. A lot of politics get into play there. I know in your last article you heard from the chair of the House Ag Committee, Liberal Cody Bloys. We've heard a lot of members of Parliament that are willing to help if it does get back to the House of Commons. Well, that delays it for farmers, COVID. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is provide relief for farmers. I know the farmers we're hearing from, depending on where you are in the country, it's been a wet harvest, running their grain dryers, full time during harvest to get their crop off and make sure they don't have spoilage. So again, the report is recommending amendments. Our position is those amendments should be rejected, and the bill in its original form should be reintroduced in the Senate third reading. We hope that senators understand the validity of our concerns and that they see through some of these procedural kind of fancy footwork that's being done. Again, in the House of Commons, it's not that if it is sent back to the House of Commons, I think we're confident those amendments would be rejected. It just becomes a procedural nightmare because you're dealing with government business, you're dealing with the Christmas holidays coming up, and times that the House is not sitting. So again, all is not lost if that does happen, but it would just the only people that lose out are Canadian farmers, ranchers, and growers that have been watching and following this bill and that are hoping to see that relief so that they continue to invest in their operations.
So what do you see when Senator Black, as the chair of the Ag Committee, brings this report back to the Senate and the Senate as a whole has to vote on it? Where are you at in terms of the vote and senators in favor and against and that critical vote that will likely happen here in the next couple of weeks at some point?
Yeah, we'll have a better sense coming to timing sort of after, assuming they get through clause by clause this evening. But we anticipate that the Conservative senators would obviously vote in favor of the bill. The majority of the Canadian senators group, just Senator Rob Black's group, would vote in favor of the bill. We've met with a number of the independent senators group, which Senator Simons is a member of, who voted for this amendment. We know a number of those senators are in favor of the bill. We've met with them. A number of them are actually champions of the bill, have spoken positively about the bill. The real wild card is what the Progressive Senators Group do. So the Progressive Senators Group are formerly they were the Liberal senators up until 2014, when then opposition leader Justin Trudeau removed them from cabinet, but they're still used an extension of the Liberal Party in the Senate. They don't attend caucus meetings and they have a different name. It would be concerning, but there's a good chance that the Progressive Senators whip the vote, which would mean that their party leadership says you're voting this certain way. Again, this doesn't typically happen with a private member's bill. That being said, if the other groups in the Senate are in favor, we would win the day. I am quite confident that so long as senators understand kind of how we got here with the amendments. Again, through a number of communications we and our members will be doing over the course of this week and media interviews like this, that senators will see the validity of returning the bill to its original form. Again, it's just sort of breaking that convention of typically, if you're a urban senator on the Finance Committee and the House of the Senate Agriculture Committee brings you an amendment to a bill, you typically assume, well, they know what they're talking about. They're experts. Just like an ag committee member would defer to a finance committee member on a proposed tax change or whatever it might be. However, the way 234 was dealt with clause by clause was not conventional. Therefore, we're going to be making sure that we get out, speak to every senator electronically and through my co-chair Scott Ross from the Canadian Federation of Agriculture. They have their Hill Day today, so they'll be in front of 40 parliamentarians. Canadian canola growers, we have our Hill Day November 7th. We'll have 4 teams on the Hill all day. So we'll be getting the message out about why they need to actually take a really close look at what typically a private member's bill likely wouldn't have sort of garnered so much attention. So I am confident. I mean, besides a couple meetings we've had in the Senate, we've heard resounding support for the bill, for its concept. And I think just knowing that this is not novel, that gasoline and diesel is exempt, we're trying to tidy up an exemption. We're not trying to create a slippery slope where everything's exempt from carbon tax. We know that's not going to fly for the current government of the day. So yeah, cautiously optimistic. It's just unfortunate that we are where we are because of procedural posturing. None of it's about the merits or the validity of the bill. That's been litigated and from every angle in the House and the Senate. And unfortunately, procedure and an attempt to delay and obfuscate from the government is where we are at the Senate right now.
From afar, Dave, as somebody who follows politics in Ottawa from afar here in Western Canada, the fact that this bill was approved by the House of Commons and the predecessor bill to it, which had the same intent, Bill C-206, also would have removed the propane and the carbon price from propane and natural gas used on farms. The fact that it's passed through the House of Commons, this concept multiple times, the fact that the Senate can still potentially derail and block this, it just makes I don't understand how that just in democratically elected MPs have supported this multiple times. The fact that the Senate could still get in the way of it. Can you comment?
I fully agree. And again, it breaks convention. It breaks the norm. This is not typically so. The only thing, without getting overly Machiavellian that you can really read into it is that whether the Prime Minister's office or the powers that be are directly interfering in the Senate process. The Senate is supposed to be on kind of partisan politics for the most part. Unfortunately, we saw with the change of the committee composition, breaking norms as far as Senate government representatives voting on procedural bills. Again, the way it's been treated clearly shows that this is not the normal course. And again, I have significant concerns that the chair of the Senate Standing Committee on Agriculture ruled the amendments out of order and were defeated procedurally by a vote because the committee was stacked in a certain way that they were not ag committee members there deliberating the merits of the bill. It was there for procedural. Unfortunately, in Canada, I think between Alberta, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan, you have 12 or 13 seats. I think Saskatchewan might have 5 of 95 current seats. There's 105 seats available. 95 seats are currently occupied, but only a dozen of those essentially are from the prairies. And again, and as your last article indicated, Senator Dalphon and Senator Wu were from downtown Montreal and downtown Vancouver, putting forth amendments on a bill that it impacts all Canadians, but really the primary stakeholders are rural Canadians, farmers. So again, this breaks convention. I know if you might have seen, both John Barlow as the vice chair and Cody Bloys as the chair of the House Agriculture Committee actually wrote an open letter to the Senate Agriculture Committee. Again, reiterating they felt the amendments were out of scope. They felt they were out of order. This is a liberal and a conservative standing hand to hand and saying, this is out of order. This is out of scope. The House of Commons duly passed this. These amendments change the scope, the intent of the bill, which again is typically viewed as ultra vires for the Senate. The Senate should scrutinize and make sure, nothing was overlooked, but changing the intent of a bill is not typically the remit of the Senate, particularly a private member's bill. Again, breaks convention, breaks norm. So again, you have to think these senators didn't just come up with this. This is intentional, and unfortunately, we're seeing politics play out, and the only people that are hurt by it are Canadian farmers, who probably need the relief now more than ever.
Final question then, Dave. Why do you think the government or these senators are putting up such a fight and investing so much energy, breaking convention, like you say, to hold this bill up?
Well, I mean, regardless of looking at where polling is right now, I think the Liberal Trust, Brain Trust, would say we've ran on a carbon tax 3 times in a row. We've been elected 3 times in a row, again with first past the post, and not popular vote, but won the most seats. That they feel that Canadians support carbon tax, and that this bill, they do not favor any exemptions that would further erode the carbon price signal. Despite, I mean, I think simply the cost of inputs is the best way to that farmers look at as a line item. To no one is using gasoline, diesel, natural gas, propane, seed, crop protection products, or fertilizer unnecessarily. No one's applying more than they need to because of just simply the cost associated with it. I think the other part could potentially be, again, your article touched on it. It's $1 billion. We know now from the parliamentary budget officer that if Bill C-234 passes, its 8-year sunset clause, its 8-year lifespan, it would save Canadian farmers $975 million in carbon tax. That's $975 million out of the government coffers. Again, I hope that is not a driving factor, because that is a drop in the bucket relative to the overall budget, relative to the overall deficit. But unfortunately, I think the Liberals are fighting this based on their philosophy of carbon pricing, despite having gasoline and diesel exempted, and natural gas and propane are typically viewed as transition fuels too. So again, I think it's a lack of understanding of Canadian agriculture, of rural Canada, and putting ideology over just being pragmatic and practical, unfortunately.
All right. And like you said, grain drying season is underway and barn heating season is just beginning. Parts of Western Canada receiving snow, waking up to snow this morning. So
I saw, yeah.
it's those bills are starting to come in, and from a farmer's perspective, nobody's spending more than they want to on these things already. So thanks for taking the time. I know you have a busy few days, at least a few days ahead of you here, Dave.
Thanks, Kelvin. Can I just add one more thing just before we sign off? Just that you will see more from the Agriculture Carbon Alliance the coming days. We've been working on our strategy. The one thing I would say, for farm groups that are listening, whether national, provincial, or farmers themselves, if you want to do something, please, all it takes is a quick Google. And if you know a senator, great. Write to your senator, call your senator's office. But I believe, and again, speaking a little bit out of school here, because our Carbon Alliance meeting is not till Thursday of this week. But we intend, I believe, to create an easy way for farmers to reach directly out to senators. But in the meantime, if you're from Alberta, if you're from Saskatchewan or Manitoba, just Google the senators from your province. Send them a note. It's very easy. All their emails are publicly findable. At send.parle.ca. I would just encourage, if you're concerned about this dying at the report stage, if you're concerned about not receiving the relief that we've been working on for the last 2 years, write to your senators, your provincial senators, and just encourage them to take a sober second thought at this, and look at the amendments besides the politics and procedure. So write to your senators from your home province and encourage them to stand against this. And again, we will hopefully have an easy vehicle for farmers to do that in the next couple of days. But in the meantime, please reach out, let the Senate know. Pick up the phone if it's more convenient, if you're in the combine, and call your senator. All their information is publicly available by Google, on the parliamentary website. Have your voice known. Every voice is going to matter on this one. And just thanks for the time today, Calvin, and for Real Ag for keeping the pressure on this one.
All right. We'll continue to follow it. Thank you, Dave.
Thanks, Calvin.